I picked up my local paper today. Yesterday there was a vote in the House of Representatives which would have provided, which passed, which would, if it carries into law, provide hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to a handful of families in this country. Wasn't mentioned in the newspaper. The repeal of the estate tax. Half of the benefits of that repeal will go to the richest 1/10 of 1% of the population. All of the benefits will go to the wealthiest 2% of the families in America. You got that? 98% of the families do not pay one nickel in estate tax. I walked down the street a couple of months ago. Guy goes up and he says, "Bernie, I'm really angry at you." You know, why are you angry? "I've got $20,000 in the bank and I want to leave my money to my kids, and why are you stopping me from doing that?" $20,000. This guy's not going to pay one penny in estate tax. People don't know that. So what they do is they poll. They got very good pollsters, and you play off the general ignorance of the population. People don't know much. Death tax sounds pretty good. Everybody who dies, you got to pay a huge tax to the federal government. Not true.
We put the death tax on the road to extinction. The death tax is a bad tax.
And yet that 99% ran around waving little flags going, "We're free! We're free! We live in a democracy! Woohoo!"
Your job is, if you're at the network, to cover the basics. The basics mean that government, the entire federal government with millions of employees, is boiled down to the White House and the Capitol. You have a reporter at each place, and they're on every night. And that's the extent of your federal government news coverage. It's idiocy.
Shocking.
It's shocking and it's pathetic. And so you can have an SNL scandal that goes on for years and no one notices because that's an obscure, now defunct agency called the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. Well, how many reporters do you think are down there covering that? Hardly any.
If a member of Congress gets an appropriation for $58,000 in order to put some funding into a house or something, or into something in his community, it's liable to make the front pages. Congressman Jones gets pork, $58,000 for this stupid project. Headlines. But when you spend hundreds of billions of dollars, it is more likely that the hundreds of billions will not be covered than the $58,000.
How did journalism get this way?
To remove controversy from story selection. So you can't be yelled at for why did you put this on the front page and didn't cover some other story. There becomes a tremendous reliance upon official sources as the basis of legitimate journalism. This was a new thing. You know, in 1875, if the governor said something wacky, a newspaper editor would say, "I'm not going to cover that, it was stupid."
Newspapers, they don't invent stories. They go to people, experts in this country, for their opinions on what's coming down or not coming down.
It means those people in power, political power especially, but also business power, are sort of the assignment editors of journalism. What they want to talk about becomes news. If they agree that they don't want to debate something, like the CIA, it's virtually impossible for a journalist to introduce that as a story.
If the media had been on the job during the 2000 election, for example, if they had reported what was actually going on and reported it with all due emphasis and repetitiousness, kept on the story day after day. I don't mean the occasional piece on page 10 of the New York Times. I mean appropriate coverage where you follow the scandal. If that had happened, Bush Cheney wouldn't be in the White House today because they weren't elected. They stole the election.
The range of inquiry by journalists was strictly determined by what the official sources were saying. In this case, the Gore campaign and the Republicans, the Bush campaign. And journalists basically, their credible journalism volleyed between these two positions. Now, the problem with that was very simple. The two sides were playing by very different rules, very different game plans. On one side, you had the Republicans, and they were committed to winning this election no matter what. Principle be damned. They were taking power, period. That underscored everything they did. So there was no commitment to being principled whatsoever. One day, if you got the right ruling by the state Supreme Court, it's clearly a state issue. The ruling 2 days later goes against you. The exact same people say it's clearly a federal issue. There was no sense of shame. The point was you wanted power, period. And it was an extraordinary propaganda effort by the right because you couldn't even find a Republican dog catcher in Idaho who would disagree. Everyone barked out the exact same line every day. It was Joe Goebbels would have been impressed with the lockstep in which the Republican machine marched in their eagerness to take power and take this election. The problem was, for those of us who just think whoever gets the most votes should win and wanted a fair election, the journalism didn't reflect that interest. It was a prisoner of that range of debate, and therefore it played directly into the hands of the Republicans.
The BBC reported that 5 months before the 2000 election, Governor Jeb Bush moved to purge 57,000 people from the voting rolls, supposedly ex-felons.
The great story that was broken by Greg Palast from Britain, which has now been confirmed, on for the first time, the use of by Catherine Harris of this private company to come up with a list of felons who wouldn't be permitted to vote, which was a dreadfully bogus list of thousands of people who weren't permitted to vote, who should have been.
According to Palast, a private firm with Republican ties, Database Technology, signed a $4 million contract to provide scrub lists of ex-felons. Part of the job was to verify the list, which the firm acknowledged was inaccurate.
The state of Florida brought in this Republican firm on the excuse that they had these databases, and when the company said, well, now we want to run the databases against this list of 57,000 names, there's a little handwritten notation that says, in Catherine Harris's office, right on the listing of the database checks, it says, don't need. We will give you, what they told DBT, we will give you the check if you don't check. How many of these names are wrong? Statistically, 1 in 20 people on the list may have committed a crime. So 95% of the people on the list, 95% of the people on the list, are kind of innocent. Now when I say kind of innocent, see, 54% of the people on the list are unequivocally guilty of being black. Now you do the arithmetic, okay? 95% of a list of 57,700 people, 54% of them black. Catherine Harris certified the election of the President of the United States on the basis of a plurality in Florida of 537 votes. You do the arithmetic and you tell me what happened in that election.
Palast, when he first broke it, CBS News called him up. And CBS News said, yeah, we might want to work on this. And Palast said, well, go ahead, follow up on it. You can have it. Nothing happened for a couple of days, so Palast called up the producer at CBS News and said, why aren't you covering this? And the producer said, and I'm paraphrasing, well, we called up Governor Jeb Bush's office, and he said that it wasn't true. It didn't check out, so we're not going to go with it.
We did not do any kind of frontal, direct investigation of the media for 10 or 11 years, mostly because our information we put out with news conferences and things like that is disseminated through the media. So it would be, I'm being very candid here, it would not behoove me to investigate the media on a regular basis because none of the information would ever be reported and my organization would never be heard from again. And so I'm not stupid. I do recognize that fact. But I have been getting so frustrated, and I decided it was time that we looked at the media. We had half a dozen people working for 6 months, and we investigated, and we found, of course, that the most powerful special interest in Washington today is the media.
Lobbyists hire placeholders. These people line up first thing in the morning for spots in committee hearing rooms allocated to the public. A few minutes before the hearings begin, the lobbyists arrive.
These guys have hundreds of lobbyists. They have nearly 300 lobbyists, paid lobbyists, and they're giving away tens of millions of dollars in campaign contributions, and they control whether or not a politician ever gets on the air all over America. That's power.
Being successful lobbying at the FCC or Congress is as important to the bottom line as producing a movie that's a big hit. I mean, it's every bit as important. It's more important. That's basically stealing stuff from government is the key. And this is where the media companies are extremely successful because they, unlike any other corporate lobby, have one thing going for them the others don't. They actually control the means by which the public can actually learn about these debates. You can imagine Exxon would love to have owned the media, or Philip Morris. So any debate over cigarettes has to go through them.
They took members of Congress on 315 all-expense-paid trips around the world. And then you have the FCC regulating the broadcaster, 1,400 privately funded trips. How's the FCC going to tenaciously, aggressively regulate the broadcasters when they're taking trips from them all over the world? Well, of course it's not going to happen, and guess what? It's not happening. The problem in this town is that a lot of the regulators that have been set up to protect the public interest have been captured by the people they're regulating, and that's been going on for years. It's not new, but it's outrageous.
Regulators, the Federal Communications Commission, almost always upon leaving office, go to work for the people they were supposedly regulating in the public interest.
Beneath the reported story of greedy Enron executives is a story about the influence of money over government regulators. This is what has happened with the media companies.
Had been well designed. Crazy, crazy Jane is dancing. Crazy Jane's the dancer. Crazy Jane's the dance. See her, pure wet hot sorrow, offer up tomorrow.
Rupert Murdoch. You all know Rupert? Right. Rupert is one of the smartest and most dangerous people in this country.
Rupert Murdoch is the primary owner of the News Corporation. In the United States, he owns the Fox News network. But Murdoch's media empire is global. Among his many holdings is a satellite TV service in partnership with the Chinese. Just as he gave a huge book deal to Newt Gingrich, Murdoch gave the supreme Chinese leader's daughter a book contract to write a biography of her father.
Well, if I'm going to get my book published in your capitalist society, I have to find a capitalist to publish it. Regardless of whether it's one of Mr. Murdoch's companies or not.
The nature of what used to be considered a bribe has morphed into a quid pro quo, an indirect payment, and it's legal.
We have massive problems with what I call legal corruption all over America, where the system has been gamed by various powerful interests, and it's all disclosed, of course. Of course, no one reads it, and the media doesn't generally report it. Don't get me started. And so this is a wink and nod exercise with rampant corruption, and the American people kind of actually, in a very interesting way, viscerally understand that things are corrupt. I was a producer at 60 Minutes and worked in network television for 11 years, ABC and CBS, 60 Minutes, and I was an investigative reporter for those places. And I quit one day. My story led the show. I quit because the idea of everything being simplified down to good guys and bad guys and the formulaic infotainment thing was getting a little old for me. I decided that I didn't want anybody telling me what to investigate, and I was going to decide myself what to investigate, and I was going to take as long as I needed, not 2 weeks, to solve a 20-year-old unsolved murder. Today, we're up to 35 people. It's, knock on wood, been very exciting, but that's how it got here. So. You have this contracting of ambition about what should be covered and what the public has a right to know about. The price of power in Washington, who really makes money and who really benefits from the decisions. What will pass for investigative reporting is though someone may get a hold of an early report from some committee that's about to come out, or an inspector general's report that's going to castigate the secretary of this or that. And so you'll breathlessly go on the air and, you know, you'll say ABC News has learned or whatever the network is, and you'll be out of breath, and it's all exciting. You're holding up a report, and it'll look like the faceless minions that comprise the network, hundreds of them out there ferreting information out for you to serve the public. It's complete bunkum, of course. It's not happening at all.